Hello, and welcome to the European Resilience Initiative Center video podcast. Today, our guest in Turku, Finland, Artis Pabriks. He's a former Deputy Minister of Latvia, he's a former Defense Minister and former Foreign Minister of Latvia, and now he's a Director of Northern Europe Policy Center. Thank you for having found time for us.
Thank you.
And my first question is, do you observe that the countries of like Germany or France now respect all the things you used to say for years about how dangerous Russia is?
I would say that they started to listen what we have been saying much more after the 4 o'clock in the morning on 24th of February 2022. Because if I remember already the first hours when the Russian invasion started, we got basically queuing of Western, particularly Western media, which wanted to get our opinion, because the things we were telling in previous years, and particularly the last few months before the invasion, actually, or unfortunately, happened almost one-to-one how we have been explaining that.
But what was your feeling? Like, can you describe, like, what was your first impression on the 24th of February 2022?
Well, actually, that was quite surreal feeling because, of course, those were the hours on 23rd of February that we already have been informed by our security intelligence people that the things will start. And somehow, you know, simply from such a human perspective, you don't want to believe that something like this is happening. But my feeling was when I was woken up from, let's say, quite troubling sleep, and I was in Poland at that time, actually visiting my colleague, Polish defense minister near Warsaw, I had a feeling that I could imagine how our predecessors, grandparents could be feeling, let's say, 1939, 1940, when the war started, because it was something similar, because we got this information, these pictures, these missiles flying, you know, tanks moving, people getting killed. So it was something a little bit unbelievable. But on the other hand, I mean, I remember all our team was just gathering. We were waiting for news, answering to the news questions, and of course, planning how we could even more help Ukrainians, because it's not secret anymore that Latvia was one of the first countries before 24th of February managing to deliver such, in those days, very important weapons like Stingers. And now I can tell that it happened that on 23rd of February, my people were calling me and telling our birds had landed, so things are fine. So our delivery was in time. And just later, Ukrainians actually acknowledged that Latvian Stingers, Latvian support was quite crucial for them in defending also Hostomel Airport and some other places and parts near Kiev.
Before we go further to the questions of how did Latvia support Ukraine in 14 plus months of the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and what happened within the West and what role is NATO playing now, don't forget to share, to like, to subscribe to our channel and leave your comments into the commentary section. You have described this feeling that you understood how, like, your grandfathers felt in 39 in Poland, like our friends in Poland, or your grandfathers in like the year 40.
And also 1939, once we had ultimatum, you know, in 5th of October. So
exactly. And can we say that now the West is repeating the same mistakes, or used to repeat the same mistakes?
Partly, yes. Because I never kind of was feeling that I can convince somebody in Kremlin or in Russia, because you know, they have their own agenda, their own perspective, and they are simply following their own plan. While in many Western nations, and I speak about West, because on the one hand, Baltic states, Latvia and Poland and Finland, we are also West, but not always we are recognized originally as the West. But in the Western countries, as it was also told in this conference in Turku, people start to understand that we are in the war, even if we do not participate ourselves. But they are not acting like in the war. So people always try to feel like they could live in this illusion that everything is fine until the bomb is not falling exactly on my head. It's not a war for me, even if it is falling on the neighboring house. And the problem is that, for instance, if the West and Western societies and some Western elites also would move faster and acknowledge, I would say, also their mistakes in understanding Russia, in understanding the depths of crisis, we probably will be able to avoid much more sacrifices, and maybe this war already would be over.
But that was this idea, like we need to avoid escalation. Escalation was the most used word in German political rhetoric.
Yes, of course. And I was following German media quite a bit, and I had quite tough arguments with some of the German politicians before the war and also briefly after the war. And this is a kind of a fundamental misunderstanding of Russian elite mentality and what they can expect from Russia. Because, for instance, if Europeans or Germans or somebody else, in this case, are going to Japan or China, they understand that there is a different perspective, how they are understanding politics and how do they perceive it. But when they go, for instance, to Moscow or speak with Kremlin, they think that the reactions will be just the same if they go from Paris to Berlin. And this is total mistake. This is total mistake because people there are thinking differently, and this is where this illusion about escalation, for instance, the only escalation. What happened was that there were not a proper answer, for instance, from the West when Russia invaded Georgia in 2008. When the West was simply blinking eyes and telling nothing, this was escalation because Russians understood that they can go forward. The same happened in 2014. And the proof of that is if you are looking for this pre-stage security council meeting of Russia, which was, I think, put on the YouTube just a few days before 24th of February, where actually Dmitry Medvedev very clearly told, okay, we go to Ukraine, so what will happen? They will put a little bit sanctions against us, they will make some declarations, and then the things will be like they were before. So Russians understood that the West will not act. And by this kind of sentiment and this signal of West, the Russia was encouraged to wage a next war, was encouraged to invade Ukraine, and the West actually, by thinking not to escalate, actually proposed escalation.
Did this wrong perception of what Russia, how the Russians interpret our actions, did this wrong perception change since last year?
It did change partly. Because on the one hand, many politicians understand, but there have been a lot of mistakes committed before for decades, because economic dependency, which we are now trying to turn around regarding energy, military disarmament of European continent, also the withdrawal of American troops during the Obama time from Europe, decrease of the troops presence, all these signals were kind of giving for Russians the idea that the West is a weakling society. And in many ways, this perception is fed still now, because if you are trying, and sorry if I'm not politically correct, but these discussions around cultural wars, these discussions about kind of a structures which are above the fundament in societies, at the same time by not seeing that there is actually war going on, that this is a question of life and death. This basically makes Russians to feel that they can overrun the endurance of the West. And that makes also Russian leadership to think that if they keep pushing against Ukrainians, at the end, West will give up.
But is it not what is going on now? Like on one hand, we have delivered heavy equipment to Ukraine, starting from artillery systems and now tanks and infantry fighting vehicles. But are we ready for a long-term war? Like, do we have enough supply?
At this moment, we don't, because you cannot resupply everything which was lost during the last 30 years. I would say that there are two problems why there are not enough supplies for Ukrainian army. The first thing is, of course, the political motivation. Because people already forgot that there have been for months these debates, including in Germany, about offensive and defensive weapons. And this is artificial debate because there is not existence of a defense and offensive weapons. Because, for instance, if you give a Ukrainian a handgun, and Ukrainian soldier is at the border with Russia and can shoot with handgun across the border, is this offensive weapon now? So wouldn't we give them also handguns? So from that perspective, people were misled. Action was not taken. And also now, I would say that, for instance, the attitude about, for instance, 15 lost Bradleys in Ukrainian counteroffensive. If you want the correct reaction against Russian invasion, then the West should tell, look, Ukrainians lost yesterday or day before 15 Bradleys. You know, you Russians will not get away with this. Tomorrow we will grant, instead of 15 Bradleys, 150 Bradleys. So we will deliver it. So don't think that you can overcome or overrun Ukrainian army. This is how the sentences should flow. And sorry, for instance, if I touch upon also the nuclear threat, because nuclear threat is always there, and we never for 100% can predict what Russia will do. But I think that whatever, but Russians are not stupid people, and the elite should not be stupid. We should not disregard their capability to analyze. They can make mistakes, but they should be capable to analyze. So, for instance, if the Western society, the Western leadership is threatened by use of nuclear weapons, tactical weapons in Ukraine or somewhere else, I think we simply should use all the channels to tell these Russian let's say, decision makers, you can do it, but we can do it the same. And we have more economy, we are stronger. So basically, this discussion should be something like maybe Reagan's discussion with Gorbachev. So you simply cannot endure, because Russia is what, 3% of the world economy? West is 50%. How could it happen that this war is still going on and Russia has more resources? Plus sanctions, also what was actually taught here in Turku. One of the important goals of sanctions against Russians is that they cannot again produce so much weapons what they need for war, so they don't have simply those spare parts. And of course we need to keep at bay such countries as Iran and China, so they are not supplying Russia with weapons and equipment.
That's true, and if we look at what we have delivered to Ukraine and how the discussion went, like first there were from Ukrainian side a lot of criticism that the weapons were delivered too late and there were too few of them. But now we have another discussion. Do we have, for example, enough ammunition to supply Ukraine? Like, do we have enough of production to replace the ammunition we have already supplied? Is this discussion a focus, like, is there a focus on this discussion in our Western societies?
Well, there is focus, of course, among the elites, but still, the way how the discussion is led and how it is presented in society is like we are trying to solve this issue by some kind of a peacetime approach. And I would say, sorry, if I don't want to sound too hawkish, but I don't want to make people live in illusions. And I think we should follow the old advice of Winston Churchill. You know, we have to win in the seas, on the land, in the air, and we need to supply Ukrainian army and ourselves immediately now. So if there is a need for hundreds of millions, we should put it in economy. If there's need for billions, we should put it in economy, because the next 10 years must be a years of a military industrialization or re-industrialization of the West. If we cannot produce enough, even of ammunition, we will not be capable actually to say to anybody who want to offend us that we are capable to defend ourselves, because there is not enough of ammunition in any storage house in the Western countries, and Ukraine needs it. So we are behind the schedule already now. In wartime, there is a need for wartime economy and wartime thinking, and this is still what is missing.
Or, for example, that the Ukrainian army depends on Chinese-produced drones for their platoon-level operations. Now, that is indeed very strange. But before we go further to the questions of what is going on with NATO and how the accession of Finland to NATO and the future accession of Sweden improves the situation in security in Europe, don't forget to like, to share, to subscribe, and leave your comments into the commentary.
And leave your comments.
But looking at what happened with NATO recently, we know that there is this joke that Vladimir Putin is the NATO salesman of the year. Were you happy when you heard the news that Finland finally ceases to be neutral?
No, Finland was never neutral, and Sweden was not neutral, but they were not part of alliance. And for us in Latvia, of course, it was a very positive decision by Finland and by Sweden, because it finally gives us a possibility to engage in full cooperation as far as security and defense with our closest neighbors, which have a certainly relatively good capacity also for defense. And these are the close nations, and to us geographically and also militarily. One of the weak spots of the Baltic states and our region is that we have a border with Russia, a possible invader, and just few hundred kilometers behind us we have a Baltic Sea. So we do not have a strategic depth. By Finland and Sweden joining NATO, we are much better defendable geography. We have a strategic depth. We have very good possibilities for cooperation. So the Northern Europe is becoming actually much more secure by membership in NATO of these two countries.
And motivation of the army.
And these are all motivated armies, just like our armies. And so I think the future will be much better for us.
When we look back into the February 22 and Latvia took decision to supply Ukraine with arms, wasn't it a fear among the Latvian elites that this can make the Baltic states unprotected if Russia decided to attack?
Well, we did not send everything what we have to Ukraine. Yes, we have been counting what we can do and what we can't do, but we also understood that Ukraine needs it much more, because we are still a NATO country. We have some better backup, political and military backup, than Ukraine, but we could not perceive and accept that in this just defensive war Ukraine can lose, because for us it was very clear, if Ukraine is given to Russia to be digested and to be occupied, then we will be the next target. So it was in our actually national fundamental interest to do everything that Ukraine prevails in this war.
If we look at Russian hostile activities in Europe, and in particular in the Baltic countries, the Russians use cyber attacks. They also use political groups in our states. They also try to influence our political discussion. Is there any Latvian answer to these threats? You should have been very experienced with this type of threats.
Yes, and I would say that we are not more threatened than any Western country. Simply, we started to take precautionary steps much earlier when we were speaking about this. And just look at all three Baltic countries. And I think the litmus test and the way how we have been thinking and preparing is described by the excellence centers of NATO. Because in Estonia, you have excellence center for cybersecurity. Why? Because already in 2004, if I remember correctly, there were the first cyber attacks against Estonians when they started to remove one of those monuments in Tallinn. In Lithuania, they have been experiencing energy threats. So they have NATO Center for Energy Security. And in Latvia, we established a Center for Strategic Communication, excellent center for communication, for fake news, for false flag operations, for working with society. These three excellent centers was there because we could see that energy, cyber, and Stratcom, these are among the soft power security threats already for decades, when many other Western countries, including the large ones, were simply not taking this into account. And now we have gathered quite a bit of expertise, which all these centers are actually sharing with our allies and partners in the West.
But is there now this understanding between the Baltic countries and the, how you call them, like Western European countries? Because as far as I can remember, for example, look at the situation with the languages, like Russian language schools or Russian language media. I remember 10 years ago, like 15 years ago, every time when Latvia or Lithuania or Estonia tried to approach this challenge, and it was a challenge, they got addressed by Brussels or by other countries saying, no, you may not do this because it's a language is neutral.
Well, certainly, because the understanding was lacking there, and people in these institutions or some Western countries were driven only by their own experience. And the same actually applies now to migration policy, because European migration policy is designed totally for different challenges. It was designed in the early 90s, and now when in the last years we are facing this Lukashenko and Belarus organized migration attacks by simply in an organized way bringing people from some other countries and pushing on our border. I think that many Western or European Union institutions at the beginning were simply not understanding how to act, because obviously Russia and Belarus, in this case as a satellite country, was looking for any kind of opening within Western societies to try to fragmentate them, because if we are homogeneous, we are very strong, but we are much larger than Russia. So they have to look smartly in a way how they can split Western countries, Western societies. So migration is one of the issues. And in Baltic countries, of course, one of the ways how to dominate and how to split us away from other EU countries was to argue about imagined Russian minority rights, which are not there. But already for a decade ago, when I have been asked this question from some of our allies in the West or from some NGOs, don't you think that you should give kind of more rights to so-called Russian minority in Latvia? I was telling, look, and this is a fact, if you want us to give some more rights, for instance, linguistic rights, to so-called Russian minority, because it's mainly Russian migrant minority, then we would do it with pleasure if you would do the same. Because actually, if you compare minority rights in Latvia with collective, and we speak here about collective rights, not individual rights, with countries like Germany or France and some other places, they're way back compared to us. So, and then once I give such a possibility or such an offer, then usually the Western observers are actually backing up because they are not ready to do it in their home countries. So we cannot be more holy than the Pope. So give your example. And now, once we can see these Russian attacks in Ukraine, Russian false flag operations in many societies by simply sponsoring right-wing, left-wing, whatever NGOs and parties, they start to open eyes and see, okay, you were right. So there is not anymore such kind of suggestions. Of course, earlier it was much more difficult. But I would say one more thing. I remember still times when we have to comply with Copenhagen criteria before we joined the EU in 2004. And I would say if we would not be stubborn, if we would not follow our, let's say, ancient tradition of so-called Hanseatic lawyers, as some German lawyers were telling to us, and if we would accept everything what Western advisors were then advising to us, we at this moment would be in worse situations than Ukraine.
That is an amazing remark, and that brings me exactly to the next question, which I wanted to ask you. You had this experience of being, of being a candidate and then a member of the EU, NATO, Eurozone. How do you see the chances of Ukraine to go this path in the next years?
I see a good chance, and obviously, so much as it is dependent on Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, or I would say even Finland or Poland, we will be a traditional lobby because we believe that this is a time where Ukrainians proved that they earn membership in EU and NATO because they spilled blood for that. I have no illusions about necessity of huge reforms in Ukraine and Ukrainian society. There will be a lot of things which must be done. But at the end, this is a political decision. And I know that there will be a number of countries in the EU which will be very skeptical about this. And I can already feel some of these pieces of way how they might deal with this. For instance, I would say that once we will start to push for Ukrainian membership in European Union, there will be some countries coming and telling, okay, if you want Ukraine in, it's quite a large country, but we have to make a certain reforms in European Union before we accept Ukraine. And these certain reforms we already hear now in the air, which are, let's say, a majority vote for foreign policy, a common migration policy. So there are a number of issues which are actually, I would say, we should look at them with very huge caution, because whenever we choose our policies of today and tomorrow, we should look also backwards and know our history. And if we know how it happened, for instance, with migration in 2014, when the borders were open, when we speak about, let's say, majority or vote, taking away veto rights for foreign policy, then who will dominate? Who will tell how this policy of EU will be? And I don't want my country just so easy to lose this possibility still to abstain from such decisions, because as history shows, when we have been warning about Russia for 20 years, not many people listened to us. If we would have a majority vote in foreign policy already in those days, I guess we would be in a much larger mess than now.
That's true, but still, when we look at Ukraine, of course, first the war should be won by Ukraine, but the danger of Russia will not disappear.
No, it will not. It will not disappear, and I would say that the goal of this war and the goal of the Western approach should be twofold. The first, Russians must lose simply military capability to attack neighboring countries, because they are always putting in their propaganda, you see, that country is joining NATO, this country is joining NATO, they encircle us. But I think people in Moscow should ask themselves, why do these neighboring countries, they want to join NATO and they don't want to join Russia? Such an easy, simple, self-critical question. Obviously, something maybe is wrong with you, and this is what Western mentality and Western, let's say, political philosophy always tells to us. Maybe start with yourself in the morning. What did I do wrong? Not what my neighbor did wrong, what I did do wrong. Because if you look to the Russian history, I never heard, compared to other countries, that they ever admitted that they were wrong in anything. Just give me one example where Russian officials told to their neighbors, sorry, that was a wrong thing, what we did to you. So there must be incapability to attack. And the other thing which comes from this mental approach, I very much would wish that there would be change also in the Russian leadership mentality of not willingness to attack somebody, not willingness simply to cross the border. But Russia, according to our assessments and my assessment, even after they will lose this war, and they must lose this war because it's good for their mental health to lose sometimes, they probably will be a danger for neighboring countries and for Europe, because I kind of have a hard, it's hard for me to believe that Russia could actually become a a liberal democracy like Western countries, like we.
Is there, from your perspective, any understanding in Germany or France or, I don't know, Portugal, that we need, after this war, for preserving stable peace, we need either weaken Russia or achieve this, as you said, like almost impossible reform for the Russian government, that the Russian government doesn't want to attack us again? Not as they said they don't want to attack us when Putin built Nord Stream 2.
I believe that there are more people who think like this, but there is still a huge work on front of us, including also such YouTube channel like yours, because we simply have to explain people how life looks in reality. We should assist them to take off these pink glasses and see the world. It can be beautiful, but it can be also very ugly.
Thank you so much for these encouraging words about our YouTube channel. On this time I want to finish this interview, not because it was very great words, but also because our time is out. Don't forget to like, to share, to subscribe to our channel, and to wait for our next great interviews. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.